When it comes to personal transportation, electric vehicles are some of the most practical and efficient ways to get around. Even though EVs are in their relative infancy compared to internal combustion engine vehicles, they have already proven to be better in a lot of ways. They are quieter, smoother, and significantly cheaper to power. Combustion vehicles are seeing their lead shrink each year, and that is largely because EVs continue to show how much better they can be than gas-powered engines. At the same time, it can't be denied that a majority of the world's electricity is still generated by burning fossil fuels. Here in the US, about 60% of our total power comes from those sources. So when you switch over to driving an EV, are you really making that much of a difference? Isn't that just shifting the inefficiency from inside your car to a power plant miles away? Centralized energy production is more practical than millions of individual gas engines, but at the same time it still has a lot of drawbacks, particularly in terms of emissions and overall energy efficiency. However, as we see the world continue to shift away from fossil fuels and into renewable energy, EVs are actually going to get even better than they already are. For years, Tesla's central mission has been to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy, and there are multiple reasons for that. Not only does renewable energy produce no carbon emissions, but these sources have proven to be much cheaper and generally more efficient. As we shift over towards these renewable energy sources, EV and Tesla owners are going to see their cars become cheaper to operate than ever before. Today we're going to discuss some of the many ways that driving an EV is already more efficient than the competition, and how shifting energy production can save you even more money in the long run. So with that in mind, let's get into it. And a special thanks to Kinsta for sponsoring this video. EVs are already some of the most practical personal vehicles on the market right now. As we shift over towards a renewable energy economy, the current generation of EVs are going to become even better than they already are. With that being said, it's worth taking a minute to discuss the ways that they are already an improvement over other existing vehicles. Like I mentioned a moment ago, a great majority of our current electricity supply still does come from burning fossil fuels. Even still, the current generation of electric vehicles use that power much more efficiently than any other gas cars do. Let's break down exactly how that works. To start, a gas-powered engine produces a ton of energy through the internal combustion process. Gasoline is an extremely energy-dense fuel, which is why it is good for this purpose. However, internal combustion has some inherent inefficiencies that really put it at a disadvantage compared to full electrification. According to a study conducted by Yale University, about 68 to 72% of the energy produced from gasoline combustion is lost as heat inside the engine. Another 9 to 13% of the generated energy is lost to other parasitic processes like engine cooling systems, friction in the drivetrain, and to electronics in the car. From the initial fuel, only about 16 to 25% of the total energy produced actually makes it to the motors and wheels themselves. That's over 3/4 of the total energy that is completely unusable here. This is a huge amount of wasted energy, and it's made worse by the fact that ICE engines actually tend to perform even worse as they age. A study done by the University of Michigan found that 10-year-old gas cars tend to use 33% more gas per mile than when they were new. Across the board, current EVs use their stored energy much more efficiently than any gas-powered car. To start, it's important to know that the charging itself is not 100% efficient. Of the outside power that is supplied to your car, about 10% of that is lost in the charging process. This is the case with all battery-powered tech, unfortunately, but as the technologies improve, I expect that we will see these numbers get better. Of the power that actually makes it to the vehicle, a great majority of it is actually used to propel the vehicle. About 18% is lost to friction and related heat in the drivetrain, 3% to powertrain cooling and steering, and then another 0 to 4% for miscellaneous auxiliary features. This means that about 75 to 80% of the vehicle's total stored power is directly translated to the wheels and motors themselves. That's already much better than an ICE vehicle, but EVs have another factor working in their favor: regenerative braking. This can add about 22% of the original energy back to the vehicle, just through normal driving. When you factor that in, an EV's total efficiency ends up in the 87 to 91% range, which is really amazing on its own, but especially compared to the alternative. From that data, it's immediately clear that an EV is a big step up in efficiency from a gas car, but what does this really mean in practical terms for customers? Let's use an example. Say you were to fill up a gas car with 10 gallons of gasoline. Of those 10 gallons, only 2 gallons worth of energy are actually being used to move the car, with a lot of the rest dissipating as heat. Gas can be very expensive, and lately it is only getting even more so. At the time of writing this video, gas prices in the US are sitting at an average of about $3.16 per gallon. That equals $31.70 for a 10-gallon gas tank. The inherent inefficiency of a gas-powered vehicle means that you're essentially wasting about $25.36 of your money every time you fill up. By comparison, an electric vehicle is much cheaper to charge, and its overall efficiency puts your money to much better use. If you charge your car up with 60 kilowatt hours of energy, around 45 to 50 kilowatt hours of it will actually be used to directly propel the car, with another few kilowatt hours actually being regenerated through braking. And keep in mind with these numbers, these are just estimates and examples to illustrate it. And then, of course, with those numbers, that energy is still being used by the car, but that smaller amount is what isn't being wasted in the process. At a base level, electricity costs are generally much cheaper than gas, and you can really save some money there. As of the beginning of this year, the average fast charger in the US costs around 50 cents per kilowatt hour. If you charge at home, that cost drops closer to 17 cents. So if you charge your car 60 kilowatt hours, that works out to be about $30 at a fast charger and about $10 at home. Regardless of where you charge, you know that about 90% of that energy, and therefore your money too, is going directly into moving your car and not being wasted. According to that Yale study, gas cars in the United States use a total of about 8.9 million barrels of gas per day. If all of those cars were replaced with electric vehicles, that would only need the equivalent energy of around 2 million barrels of gasoline. When you use an electric vehicle, regardless of where the energy is sourced from, it is universally more efficient than a gas car could ever hope to be. This huge efficiency gap is what gives an EV such extremely high MPGE ratings, or miles per gallon equivalent. This metric was introduced by the EPA to give a true comparison on how much energy per mile EVs were actually using compared to their gas counterparts. They calculated that burning 1 gallon of gasoline produces energy about equal to 33.7 kilowatt hours of electricity. If an EV can travel 100 miles on 33.7 kilowatt hours of energy, then it has an efficiency of 100 MPGE. The average gas car in the US can only travel about 25 miles per gallon, with larger class vehicles getting worse fuel economies, and hybrids and things like that getting better. For comparison, the most popular EV in the world, though, the Model Y, has an effective MPG of 122, almost 5 times better than the average. In order to power a nation's worth of EVs, though, that would require some pretty big investments into energy production, and not all energy sources are created equal. Yale broke down some of the potential sources that could be used to generate that power, and showed just how much more efficient electrification would be across the board. Of the major fossil fuel sources, coal is the dirtiest and also least energy efficient way that we are currently generating electricity. All energy production is inherently imperfect, and no process can turn all of that stored energy directly into usable electricity. Coal in particular loses about 67% of its total potential energy when burned to generate electricity. With that being said, even a fuel as efficient as coal would reduce our total transportation energy usage by 31% overall. As I mentioned earlier, a nation's worth of electric vehicles would only require the energy equivalent of about 2 million barrels of gasoline to run. All energy production loses some along the way, and if we were to just use coal to power our EVs, that would still drop our initial energy requirements to an equivalent of 6.1 million barrels of gas compared to the 8.9 million currently used by gas cars. Natural gas, by comparison, is a pretty big step up from coal, but still far from perfect. It loses about 56% of its stored energy to power plant losses, meaning that it would take the starting energy equivalent of 4.6 million barrels of gasoline to reach the required output. Many of the biggest critics of EVs are eager to point out that most of these vehicles are still powered by fossil fuels, and that supposedly makes them no better than gas cars for the environment. Electric cars have a ton of benefits over gas cars, but the data on this particular matter is clear. Centralized power production is always more efficient. In the hypothetical that we have discussed so far, we have supposed that all of this necessary energy, though, would be made by fossil fuels, but we know that would not be the case in real life. Energy production is shifting across the world to new power sources that are even more efficient. Production and deployment of renewable energy is rapidly expanding across the nation, and it already has some huge benefits. That Yale study uses hydroelectric power as an example of a type of efficient green energy. Replacing gasoline with hydro-powered EVs would reduce the total required energy usage by as much as 75%. Hydropower plants only lose about 10% of their total potential energy, meaning that it would only require the energy equivalent of 2.3 million barrels of gasoline to power a nation's worth of EVs. So with all of that being said, you may be wondering why specifically maximizing efficiency is such a big deal overall. There are a few big reasons behind this. Next up today, as someone who runs an online business, I wear a lot of hats and have to teach myself or learn many aspects of the business I want to know more about. On top of that is running a website, which takes learning and ongoing management. Have you ever felt overwhelmed trying to manage web hosting and a million other tasks? Well, in comes today's sponsor, Kinsta. Even if tech isn't your thing, Kinsta's managed WordPress hosting is a big relief because their expert team handles it all. They've bundled the essentials to make sites stress-free with great speeds, ongoing security, and an intuitive dashboard, making it all incredibly easy. If an issue comes up, you'll talk to a real human 24/7 as well. Another great thing about Kinsta is they'll migrate your website for free with a 30-day money-back guarantee, and businesses that trust them include TripAdvisor, NASA, and Indeed. Tired of being your own website support team? Switch your hosting to Kinsta and get your first month free. And don't worry about the move. They'll handle the whole transition for you. No tech expertise required. Just visit kinsta.com/Ryan Shaw to get started. That's KINSTA.com/Ryan Shaw. First, we'll address the obvious, but still somewhat abstract priority of protecting the environment. Like I mentioned earlier, one of Tesla's most foundational missions is to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. Almost every product they make is geared towards this goal. They make solar panels to produce clean energy, stationary batteries to store and disperse that energy efficiently, and of course their electric vehicles. All of these products work together to create and use solar energy to minimize our reliance on polluting and wasteful fossil fuels. It makes sense that we would want to switch to renewables because the alternatives are just inherently wasteful. Gas not only produces a lot of emissions, but about 75% of those emissions come from completely wasted energy. Those resources cost money and energy to harvest, refine, transport, and burn, a lot of which is needlessly lost in the process of making more power. Protecting the environment is a noble goal, but for many people that are just trying to get by, it feels very immaterial. The thing which will impact you the most, though, and is likely going to be a deciding factor in the world switching to EVs, is the increased savings over time. For inefficient fossil fuels, every percentage point of lost energy directly translates to a lot of wasted money each year. The truth of the matter is that renewable energy is already much more economical than fossil fuels, and that trend is only going to continue even further. The last decade has shown that renewables are only getting cheaper to build and install. The technology is improving a lot, and economies of scale are building to drive down prices. In the 10 years between 2013 and 2023, prices of home solar installations dropped by over 50%. Lower prices have naturally done a lot to promote installations, which in turn helps grow the industry, lower prices, and sees the cycle continue. Some industry experts expect that if these trends continue, we could see solar power alone account for 20% of U.S. energy production by as soon as 2030. That estimate may be a bit optimistic, but the good economics of renewables make their adoption unavoidable. One industry executive put it best: as we look 5 or 10 years down the pipeline, I don't think the question is going to be, can you afford to go solar? It is going to be, can you afford not to go solar? Then, of course, there are tons of other renewable sources on top of that, like wind and hydro, that are also being built. In 2023, the world added an approximate 473 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity. Experts from the International Renewable Energy Agency report that 81% of those sites produced power more cheaply than fossil fuel power plants. The energy prices they can achieve are almost unbelievably low. The energy produced by utility-scale solar panels dropped to about 4.4 cents per kilowatt hour. Onshore wind turbines were even cheaper at 3.3 cents per kilowatt hour. For comparison, the average cost of fossil fuel-derived energy hovers around 10 cents per kilowatt hour to produce. Renewable energy is already sustainably cheaper than traditional energy sources, and their widespread adoption will make EV ownership even cheaper than it already is. Like I mentioned earlier, the average homeowner in the US currently pays around 17 cents per kilowatt hour. Obviously, even if all of your electricity came from wind turbines or the like, you'd probably be paying more than just 3.3 cents for your electricity. There are a lot of outside costs associated with maintaining grids and other utility-level expenses. Even if you paid twice that rate, though, it would be just 7 cents per kilowatt hour, which is over 10 cents cheaper than current rates. That price would mean that charging a 60 kilowatt hour battery would cost less than $5. If we could switch our energy infrastructure over to these renewable sources, it would save everyone a lot of money, but EV owners in particular would see some huge savings. Let's take a second to break down exactly how much money going electric could save you right now, and how much more it could save you in the future. Of course, all of these numbers I'm about to use are just estimates and may vary greatly in the future and depending on where you live. Like I mentioned earlier, gas in the United States currently costs about $3.17 per gallon. According to the US Department of Transportation, the average American drives about 14,489 miles in a single year. Since the average gas car has a fuel efficiency rate of around 25 miles per gallon, that would take about 579.5 gallons of gasoline to drive that far. That means the average American spends about $1,873 to fuel their gas-powered cars. This doesn't take into account the fact that larger vehicles have worse fuel economies, and it's well known that large vehicles are extremely popular in the US, but we're going on the average here. According to data collected by Tesla, they estimate that the average car in the US is scrapped after about 200,000 miles of driving. If we extrapolate those numbers out even further, that means that the average gas car will burn about 8,000 gallons of gas in its lifetime. At current gas prices, a driver will likely pay about $25,360 to fuel a car across its lifetime. Since only about 20% of that energy is actually used to propel your car, you could make the argument that a gas car will have wasted about $20,288 over its lifetime. Gas prices are extremely variable, though, and as we discussed, gas cars get less efficient over time, but this is merely a rough illustration to show how much adds up over time. Now let's do the same math for current EVs, again keeping in mind that these are just estimates. Assuming that you charge at home every time, we'll use that current US electricity rate of 17 cents per kilowatt hour. The Model Y is the most popular EV in the world, and on average it can travel between 3.3 to 3.8 miles per kilowatt hour. That means it will take about 3,812 kilowatt hours in order to drive that annual rate of 14,489 miles. If we add in the extra 10% that is lost to charging, you will have actually paid for around 4,235 kilowatt hours. At the current going rate of 17 cents per kilowatt hour, you will only pay about $720 per year to charge your EV. As for the lifetime of the vehicle, Teslas in particular frequently last much longer than 200,000 miles, but using that standard vehicle lifespan, that works out to be $9,941 for 58,479 kilowatt hours of electricity, of course factoring in those 10% charging losses. In both cases, that is less than half of what it costs to fuel a gas car, and that is assuming current prices. If we were to use those hypothetical renewable energy prices from a few minutes ago, the savings become even more remarkable. If energy prices can drop as low as 7 cents per kilowatt hour, an electric vehicle might only end up costing you about $296 per year. Over the course of a 200,000-mile lifespan, lifetime charging cost would work out to approximately $4,093. That is just barely 20% of what it would cost to fuel a gas-powered car in its entire lifetime, and is only slightly more than 41% of current electricity costs. Of course, in order to get to those prices, we have to first build the renewable infrastructure, though. Renewables produce the cheapest form of electricity that we have, and they are making up a larger percentage of our grid every year. In 2023, renewable energy made up about 21.4% of our total energy production in the US, which was a record high. At the same time, a lot of people across the US have seen their electricity rates dramatically increase in just the last few years alone. As we shift over to cheaper renewable energy, shouldn't our bills keep dropping? Well, a major factor there is that 60% of the US's power still does come from fossil fuels, and are therefore very susceptible to market swings. Oil prices in particular have more than doubled since the year 2000, and they fluctuate wildly depending on countless domestic and international factors. Renewable energy may not always produce the same amount of power, but large-scale battery installations help to store any excess power produced during peak hours to help stabilize the grid. For the past few years, Tesla's fastest-growing business has actually been their stationary battery division. They offer a few different products there, but the largest is their Megapack. This is a utility-level battery that stabilizes the grid and prevents power outages. Without these batteries, markets served by renewable energy run into a few problems. First, excess energy produced during peak generating hours can't be stored, leading to a lot of waste. Second, if the renewables can't make enough energy to meet demand, then most places have to turn on special peaker gas plants to supply that extra power. As we've discussed, peaker plants are much more expensive than renewables and are ultimately very inefficient, but are a necessary evil in many places right now. Batteries like the Megapack solve both of these issues by storing excess generated power to disperse when usage is high and generation is low. These batteries make renewables more feasible and reduce the need for any fossil fuel peaker plants. This drives down the cost of electricity by enabling a steady supply of cheap green energy at all times of the day. On top of this, Tesla makes another energy product that can have an even bigger and more direct impact on your own energy costs, the Powerwall. This is a home-scale battery system that seamlessly integrates into your home's solar system and provides comprehensive control over how that power is used. When paired with home solar, this Powerwall will store your excess energy produced during the day to power your home or charge your car when you need it. Solar systems can be a pretty big upfront investment, but it immediately starts producing low to no cost power, which quickly offsets that price. If you have an optimal setup, you can charge your EV at home effectively for free. A Tesla is already about as efficient of a vehicle as you can own, but when paired with their home energy products, the deal becomes even better. And these products are available from many other companies as well. Your electricity bill will stabilize by avoiding peak pricing, and you can even make a decent profit by selling your generated power back to the grid. Software built into the Powerwall can work around the clock to ensure that you are charging your electric vehicle with only the cheapest, cleanest energy available. You can set time-based controls, which defer your generated energy until the times when grid power is the most expensive, lowering your bill substantially. You can even specifically set up your home system to exclusively charge your Tesla vehicle using excess solar energy. It's a really robust system that shows us just how effective pairing an EV with renewable energy is. In certain places in the world, there has been a lot of pushback against EVs and renewable energy in general. Here in the US, the fate of both the federal EV tax credit and federal solar incentives are very uncertain. The current administration has made it clear that they want to promote domestic fossil fuel production, and that they may halt federal subsidies and investments into renewable energy. Federal incentives do a lot to make solar systems more affordable to households, but the facts that we've discussed today still make it clear that renewable energy is the future. The economics of it are simply too far in its favor. It's true that subsidies played a big part in the initial growth of renewable energy deployments, but that largely just got the ball rolling. The industry has built up those economies of scale and has continually driven down those prices over the years. While halting subsidies and incentives may temporarily slow down renewable deployment, market forces have already taken notice of its many advantages. The global economy is geared towards maximizing efficiency and minimizing costs, and they will follow that trend wherever it goes. In their Master Plan Part 3, Tesla laid out how switching to renewable energy is not only feasible, but it, quote, requires less investment and less material extraction than continuing today's unsustainable energy economy. Almost every major aspect of renewable energy production is geared towards increasing efficiency and reducing costs, in ways that fossil fuel energy cannot. When making green power, most of the upstream costs with mining, refining, and burning fuels to create electricity are eliminated. While there are some higher upfront costs associated with renewable energy production, like producing solar panels or mining battery materials, they are greatly outweighed by eliminating the need for fuel production. According to their research, Tesla estimates that electrifying the world's transportation sector would create an additional 7 petawatt-hour per year energy demand, while actually eliminating 28 petawatt-hours per year worth of fossil fuel use. When you look at the process in its totality, full electrification and renewable energy production are leagues better than fossil fuel methods of the past. Let's quickly compare the two step by step. In order to use fossil fuels, you have to first extract them. Mining coal or drilling for oil are already very dirty industries, but they also require a lot of fuel to power those large machines that make it happen. Then you have to ship those raw materials to specialized plants and refineries where they can be processed into usable fuel. Then they have to be shipped from those refineries to their end destination, where they are either burned in power plants or used to fuel vehicles. When working with fossil fuels, each step sees inefficiencies compounding on top of other inefficiencies. Tons of energy is wasted powering mining equipment, being burned in ships' engines, being burned to power refineries, and then finally combusting inside your vehicle's engine. It's a wasteful process that could be dramatically improved upon. Of course, electric vehicles and renewable energy aren't flawless in that regard. Making batteries and components for things like solar panels does require a lot of precious materials and metals that have to be mined. But once you have that set up, the power can be generated extremely cheaply and efficiently. There is some power lost through the grid transmissions process. There's that 10% lost while charging your car, but then the great majority of that energy is used to directly propel your vehicle. There are far fewer steps to getting power into your vehicle, and each step is significantly more efficient than what we see with traditional fossil fuel production and use. If you generate and store your own electricity at home via solar, then there are even fewer opportunities to lose power along the way. So it's pretty clear that an electric vehicle is much more efficient. Then the added benefit of buying an EV is that it only gets more efficient and practical as you switch over to cleaner energy sources. If you were to buy a brand new EV today, then right now would probably be the least energy efficient that it will ever be. Going forward, your car is going to become cheaper to charge just by virtue of building a more efficient and stable grid with renewables at the core. That's all for this video, but in the meantime, if you want to see the latest Tesla news, you can check out that video linked up here or in the description below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.